Okay, so it is 5:03, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, attendees, and Morgan, welcome to our solo talk here, Amplifying Unheard Voices in Product Design with Morgan Ramsey. Morgan Ramsey is a artificial intelligence user experience researcher at Compass. She previously worked at Google, and her mission is to amplify unheard voices in product design. She has specialized in developing design research strategies to build inclusive products across the US, Europe, and Latin America. And most recently, her research has influenced the Google Hangouts and Pixel 6's camera technology to better showcase deeper skin tones. She's also responsible for Compass's Likely to Sell feature, which is an AI based CRM to assist in real estate agents' business growth. And furthermore, Morgan has founded the Ramsey Research Consulting Group, a UX research coaching firm with a mission to increase representation within product development teams. And so today we're very excited to hear from Morgan as she talks through her transition into UX and how she builds inclusive technology through AI and beyond. Um, so I'll take it away. Let Morgan take it away for us.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. That was a great introduction. As she mentioned, I'm an AI or artificial intelligence user experience researcher. That's a very long, big mouthful, so we just kind of call it UX research. I'm currently at Compass, but formerly was at Google. And as she mentioned, today we'll be talking a little bit more about how I design inclusive products through amplifying unheard voices in product design. So we'll walk through what the UX field is, like what the heck is UX research, what is UX, how I got into it, and more importantly, give you some takeaways for those who might be interested in designing products and how to do that in a more inclusive way. So when I usually like to start, I'm a really big visual person, and this is a image that represents a lot to me and speaks a lot to my mission. For those who might be able to tell, great. I usually have done a guessing game, but since this is a virtual event, what this is, it's a cotton field. And it's not just any cotton field, it's a cotton field that's right outside of my grandmother's house in East Aboga, Alabama. And East Aboga, Alabama is a small little town. You'll blink and you'll miss it. But it's really important to my family because for those who may not know what a cotton field is or what it represents, it's a bed of land where American slaves would pick crops or cotton for their slave masters. And my family are descendants of slaves. And so they worked on that very field over 100 years ago. So, growing up with this history of slavery, my family's morals kind of instilled in me have always been the principles of resiliency and advocacy. And not just for yourself as an individual, but also for understanding and advocating for others. Even today, with Black Lives Matter and a lot of the social unrest that's been going on for years, my family always expects me and my younger sisters to really build for empathy. Again, not just for us, but for everyone, because everybody's has a voice and everybody has a life that matters. So of course that got me to thinking, of course, with this whole, social justice mission, I started thinking about the intricacies of advocacy and empathy and really started questioning the status quo in life. Why are certain people marginalized? Why are there groups of people that have access to certain opportunities when others don't? Why does it seem that certain lives matter more than others? And why does it seem like there's this social structure that is keeping the stratification in place? So I became a very curious kid growing up. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to a Quaker school. So the core of our education was all around critical thinking. And all of that soup of curiosity is what rolled me into going to Duke. And so I went to Duke. I became a public policy major. My goal there was really to go into law because that's what everybody was doing. You're going into business, or you're going to be an engineer, or you're going to go into law. So because I wanted to advocate, my lane was in more of the legal fields. So I thought. And in one of those semesters, I think it was about my sophomore year, we were required to evaluate a specific policy. This was for all the public policy majors. And of course, I could have gone to the library. Like Duke has a really nice library. So I was like, I could go in there and read the books and get secondhand knowledge about what's going on with the policy that I was interested in. But part of me really wanted to get my hands dirty. And I really wanted to talk to the people who were experiencing the policy change themselves. I wanted to hear from their mouths what was going on. I wanted to hear their stories from their own interpretations rather than kind of reading a secondhand source. So with that, I dedicated the majority of my collegiate career to research in the Dominican Republic. And in 2008, there was a policy that revoked birthright citizenship to Haitian Dominicans. And this is not just Dominicans who lived in Haiti or from Haiti, but it's their grandparents or their great grandparents and even children. And because of that, a lot of Haitian Dominicans lost their citizenship. So they couldn't go to school, they couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get education. There was a lot going on with that. So before I spoke to anybody, before I went to the Dominican Republic, I already thought of the solution in my mind. I was like, this could be a great situation for there's like an opportunity for e-learning or what we're doing right now, this virtual learning experience. And this was back in 2013 when it wasn't really hot, but there's an opportunity, I thought, for this e-learning virtual experience. But instead of jumping to that, instead of going straight solution forward, I really want to explore that as an opportunity and even an option with the people who are going through it themselves. So that's exactly what I did. In 2013, I went down to the Dominican Republic. I interviewed about 60 plus women in 3 different towns, in a beach town, a mountain town, and also a country town, to really just sit and listen. That's all I really did. I wrote down their experiences. I wanted to understand how their lives have changed since the policy was instated, and also seeing the discrimination that they were facing. And every day I went out there, I was on the back of a vaccine truck that was giving vaccines out to these different towns. But I took advantage of that opportunity to really hear everybody's story. And after spending about 6 months on this study, I started to formulate like, yes, maybe technology could be part of the solution. Maybe there's some type of opportunity where we can give back these possibilities and these opportunities to go to school and get jobs and all that with virtual learning. At the time, Google Loon was a really big thing. They were launching and beta testing in a lot of different remote areas because their mission was to provide internet to remote communities. So here I am, super ambitious. I'm like a sophomore. I'm like go-getter. I thought that Google would be a piece to my puzzle to give this bigger solution to this community. So that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to Google. That's gonna be my mission. I got 2 internships there and I was like, good to go, we're going to Google. But you can't just go to Google. You have to also have a job. So I was thinking, well, I know I didn't want to be in HR and I was there in HR at Google a little bit, but I'm like, I know I don't want to do this. I know I don't want to be an analyst, but what is it called, what I did in the Dominican Republic, where you go down, you hear people's experiences, you write down their stories, you analyze the data, you come up with the patterns and the themes that you're hearing across different stories, and then you're giving some type of recommendation for a product solution rather than kind of publishing it in a journal. You're then and there creating some type of solution that can circumvent the problem. And after talking to a lot of people, reading a lot of books, kind of doing my own research, I was told and found out that the field that I was doing was called user experience, or UX research for short. And what that is, it's the practice of studying user interactions to help with designs of people-first products and experiences. So if you're working for a product team, like if you're working for Apple or anything that has a physical product, what you'll be doing is you'll be testing the product itself. You'll be testing what are called prototypes and concepts with people who are potential users to say like, hey, how are you feeling about this? Is this working for you? What are some challenges that you're experiencing? What are we missing? What are the blind spots that we have? For marketing teams, if you're going into brand marketing, you might also be testing some of their brand designs and some of their messaging before a major launch. So these are a couple ways that user experience has been used and embedded in different teams. And I know it's a lot of different words and things. And the way I used to explain it to my family, because nobody really knows what I do, is that we are just simply the journalists of tech. We're the people who go down, we learn about an experience, we analyze it, we synthesize it, and we create recommendations for the product based off of what we've learned. So essentially, yes, I am a UX researcher, that is by title, but I like to think more so that I'm a storyteller, because that's essentially what we do as researchers. We tell the stories of users so that we can create better and more, in my opinion, more inclusive products. So what I know we are all, it's a live stream, so you can't do this exercise, but essentially I want to take this and put it in real time. So we have a lot of different brands here. We have TikTok, Apple, my favorite Chick-fil-A, so many different brands here. And I want you to take a second and think, pick any brand here, or even a brand that's not on the page, and just think about, why do you like these brands? What is something that you look forward to when you're going into a Chick-fil-A or when you're using Amazon? What is it about these brands that drives you to them? Go ahead and take a second to think about that. For example, I'll take Amazon. Amazon is so great because you can go on there, you do click, click, and it's in your cart and you're good to go. Chick-fil-A, which I also used to work for Chick-fil-A, in their front office, or with the giving the fries and everything, there's that second mile service. So when you go in there, you know people are going to say, my pleasure. They're going to bring you the tray. In all of these brands, the thing that ties them all together is that every brand has a story. And every brand has a story because every brand has an experience. And so we as user researchers are the ones who evaluate those experiences. We want to create data and understand the data. So we are creating opportunities and experiences for people who are using our products, so they are having a pleasurable experience. So what that looks like, for example, let's take Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. And we always have, my friends and I always have a debate, not the coffee. The coffee's great on both, but there are two distinct experiences when you're going to a Starbucks versus when you're going to a Dunkin' Donuts. For Starbucks, it's an experience of kind of sit down, stay a while. There's Wi-Fi, there are comfortable chairs, there's relaxing music. There's the intention that the person who walks into the store is going to enjoy a sit down, relax, kind of in your living room experience. Whereas a Dunkin' Donuts is more of a grab and go. You jump in, the chairs are a little uncomfortable. There's not really, sometimes there's Wi-Fi, sometimes there's not, but the coffee's going to be great. And, kind of they're speaking to their audience. They come in, they grab and go. And that's why they have a lot of drive-thrus. But again, designing this story and this experience would not have happened without the use of a user experience researcher. Because of that, they've designed a lot of their internal kind of systems and their internal structures based off these experiences. So example on the left is a huge Starbucks, but as you can see, the lights are dim. The lighting is also very useful for sitting and reading and thinking. They'll call you by your name. It's a very familial type of atmosphere. Versus Dunkin' Donuts, the chairs aren't as comfortable, but you're going to get great coffee, you're going to get great donuts, you're going to grab and go. So a lot of times brands will cater their products and their interior design and a lot of different systems based off of the data that user researchers bring to the product teams. So as again, I am a storyteller, not just of products, but also of experiences. And specifically to my mission, though, not only am I just telling any random story, I want to tell the stories of the people who are not necessarily included in those product teams and let alone the product designs. So what that means is I want to hear from the marginalized communities, whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's whatever identity it might be. I want to make sure that those stories and experiences are represented in those data points so that we can truly and effectively design holistically for everyone. So that's what brought me to Google. Essentially, I was at Google for 5 years as a UX researcher working on their strategy for a lot of their products, internally and sometimes externally. And I worked across 4 teams, starting in HR and then also moving to engineering. Also, I don't have any coding experience. There's no technical element to it, but I still was able to get into these rooms. So I can talk about that a little bit later as well. And I also worked across 2 countries. This is also pre-pandemic. So I worked in California, in the Bay Area, also New York, and then I also worked in Ireland. So lots of experiences there and trying to understand how different people in different places experience our products. Google was amazing. It was a wonderful opportunity. I'll get more into the nitty gritty of what I did there. But it's a huge company. It's maybe 200,000 plus people. And again, I'm a very curious person. So I wanted to say, instead of working at a huge conglomerate where everything is churning, it's a very established business, what does UX research look like at a smaller company, a startup even? So that's what really drew me to working at Compass. It's a real estate startup, a tech startup within that. And they have a specific AI focus, which is really the kind of cream of their crop. And so I work across 3 teams within engineering, design, and product, and across 2 cities in New York, pre-pandemic, but now I am in Chicago remotely. And so there's a lot within that, kind of going from a bigger company to a smaller company to understand how different users work with different products. But ultimately, it all sounds the same, that I'm trying to design holistically for product design. But also within that journey, it was a 5-year process to kind of transfer into UX fully. And I realized that even within that transition, I was the only person of color, specifically the only Black UX researcher in the entire UX department at Google and also at Compass. And the department is maybe about 200 plus people. So the teams themselves weren't very diverse. So how could I expect us to be designing diverse products? So what I decided to do on my spare time was found a research consultancy group where I provide career coaching for aspiring researchers and also freelance research to any startup founders. So now we can go ahead and go deeper into what I do for the day-to-day, what everything looks like, especially starting with my role at Google. At Google, I specifically worked on a team called Equity Engineering, and our goal there was to improve product experiences with equity principles. So all of our research was equity-based. So what we did was we really understand why and how and what underrepresented users thought about our products and how they were behaving when interacting with them. So it's a lot of human behavior, behavioral studies, behavioral analysis. Our major question was, how can we make sure that the products that Google is designing can be better for underrepresented user groups? So my key responsibilities there were really designing the research experiments, doing a lot of surveys, a lot of interviews, concept tests. There are a lot of different methodologies that we can go down the list, but I was in charge of leading a lot of those studies. There's a lot of conversation around critical race and systems thinking, a lot of conversation about gender and different identities. But ultimately, my favorite responsibility there was to advocate for these voices, because if we did not highlight what these experiences were, the products that we created wouldn't be able to be used by everyone. A case in point to a result of doing this research is that it doesn't kind of just go into the ether. You don't just kind of do research and it's like, great, well, thanks, on to the next. The best part about working in tech and doing research and putting all these together is that you can actually see what it looks like at the result of your research. And one of the results that I realized most recently after I left Google was that my research directly influenced a product that some of you might have seen from the Super Bowl. And that is the Google 6 Pixel camera. And I will try to play this now and let's see if it works.
People with darker complexions have always struggled with having good lighting.
Every single yearbook photo of mine has been terribly shot since I was a kid.
I always show up as too
It is
dark.
kind of echoing for me.
Cause if you love me, you love all
Is that going?
Yeah, it was echoing. Now, I'm not sure if there's a way to prevent that.
That's okay. We could just go without the music.
Okay.
Essentially, what it is that it's the Google Pixel 6 camera. It's also reflecting in a lot of the Hangouts. I don't know if you have noticed that when you go into Google Hangouts, there's like this white screen that goes on and it lightens up the complexion. But the research that I did directly impacted the technology that the Google Pixel camera uses now to make sure that those who have melanated skin tones are showing up in their best light. So as Google says, everyone deserves to be seen as they truly are. This is a new campaign, but the project really kicked off when I was there in 2019. What I do at Compass is a little bit different because there I was working more on the equity principles. But in Compass, I focus mainly on AI principles. So I kind of tie in what I learned about the equity component, the DEI component, and then I add this kind of engineering layer of AI so that we can design more holistically for product as well. So what I do there is I'm an artificial intelligence product researcher. So we use the AI principles to make sure that we're creating holistic designs. And some people might say, okay, there's like AI over here, and then there's like UX here. There are a lot of different things going on. How does that still speak to your mission? Well, one of the major issues that a lot of users have with AI technology is that they don't trust the technology. They don't trust AI. How many times have you kind of like used a Google Translate, or you've used maybe Alexa and it's misunderstood you, or it's not really understanding what you're saying, or you're getting the wrong answer? So really developing that user trust is really important. And understanding trust, even on a psychological level, relates a lot to cultural studies as well. It relates to how people understand technology, the history of technology in different communities. So I use a lot of those social principles and sociology type of components to better understand how we might be able to build trust with all users for Compass. And that also speaks to, as that's like a founding block, how do we continue to motivate users to use these products? Because it's not enough to kind of just release it into the world, but we have to make sure that we have continual motivation and consistent usage, which is what we call adoption, so that we know that the tool, the product, whatever we're creating is working and is useful. So in other words, our major question that we bring into AI research is how might we help users trust AI technology enough to use it on a regular basis? And so as an AI UX researcher, my key responsibilities are to design research experiments. So again, that's the surveys, that's the interviews, it's intercept studies, the list, usability studies, the list goes on. I develop a lot of critical and systems thinking, and that's with designers and engineers. Sometimes there's a lot of AI, ML topic knowledge, and there's also a lot of product management work within that as well. So I won't play this video because I think sometimes we're having a little bit of a technical issue. I'll try to see if I can play it without the sound. So essentially what it is that it's a platform that uses artificial intelligence to make predictions when homes are likely to sell within the next 12 months. This is a product that I worked on. And so there are a lot of different features that are in what makes a home sell within these next couple of months. One, the AI uses whether there are similar homes in the area, how long the owner has owned the home's appreciation value, and just overall economic trends that can help predict whether or not a home is likely to sell. This is essentially what the entire agent prototype looks like, but this is a tool that's mainly designed to help agents grow their businesses so they can find leads and sell houses faster. So let's go into a little bit more of what like a day in the life would look like within the product that I was referring to, which is likely to sell. And this is kind of a similar situation that I had at Google as well, and something you can expect if you go into UX research. So this is a very real-time live screenshot of my day. It's very packed. And oftentimes you see project A, B, C, and D. So there are 4 different projects that you'll be working on at one time. It kind of gives more of like a consultant vibe because you'll be brought onto a project. In blue for project A, I was doing a lot of research presentations, a lot of design syncs with designers. At the same time, for project B, I was interviewing users throughout the day for one specific, whatever we were building. For project C, I was also planning a whole nother study. So we were in the beginning cycle of a new project. And for project D, I was even launching a survey. So there are a lot of different ways that you can interact with how to get this research. But for my day in the life as an AI researcher, I'm usually working on 3 or 4 projects at a time. And there's a 6-step process here. I won't go too in depth with it because I know we're close on time, but essentially the process as a UX researcher follows these same 6 steps. One is that you really have to understand the research need. So you meet one-on-one with stakeholders to really understand the project background. You refine some of those research questions and you really clarify if there are any constraints within that process. The second one is that you study a little bit. You look at the prior research, you do a lot of reading, deep diving to see what have we already know, what do we know, and what do we still need to find. That's called understanding the gap between what we know and what we need to know. And after you have that assessment, then you create your research plan. The third step is that you recruit participants. So for me, I want to make sure that, we had a saying at Google, bad data in is bad data out. If the people who you're talking to are not diverse, you're going to get a very homogeneous data set. So I want to make sure that the participants that I'm recruiting are coming from diverse areas. Finally, we'll collect the data, you'll clean and analyze it, and then report it out and share it to executives. For me, there will be like the CEO, the directors of product to say, hey, your product is great, but there are a couple of tweaks we can make because this is what this user group said. So you might want to consider that when designing your technology for the next testing. And just for a quick snippet on kind of the progression of it, we took a lot of quantitative research. So there are about 700 agents that we took data from. We analyzed it via SQL. So you don't have to have coding, but I do have a slight background in data science too. So I did a little bit of that diving within that. We then selected the 10 agents we really want to interview, And then within that data, we cleaned it. We did all the synthesis work and finding the themes within the patterns and all that. And then we came up with 5 major product insights and recommendations for the executives to put into their new iteration of that product. So some of those takeaways, and just in terms of if you're looking to build AI design strategy, if you're looking to make sure it's done in an inclusive way, there are 4 things that I've noticed at Google, even at Compass, that stay true. One is you want to build for user trust. That is kind of the core and the foundation, in my opinion, for how users interact with AI technology. Regardless of the product, whether it's a phone or a watch, if there's some type of AI, some type of machine learning, some type of robot doing it for me, as a human, there will be some type of hesitancy around that because, some people are not very comfortable with that concept. So if you're building for that, make sure that you're designing approval processes, which means like a user can override the AI to correct the answer if need be. This kind of bows, or it's kind of like AI nodding their head at the human, being like, you're the human, you're the expert, you know more than me. And that kind of, it makes the user less on the defense side when they're interacting with these AI technologies. So I realized it's really helpful to design for like approval processes or any type of override system that the user can use when working with AI. The second that I realized is that training or some type of onboarding process is critical with a product launch. Oftentimes, the issue why users are not using a technology is not because the technology is too difficult, it's because they just haven't learned about how to use it. So I've realized within my teams, we try to plan for a system of training during a launch so that users can really understand the value of the product, what it does, how to use it, and make sure that they're interacting with it in the most effective way possible. And that can also really impact not only user motivation, but adoption. If you understand the product, you're going to be more likely to use it. Third is be problem driven. And I find that this is a problem that's not only AI specific, but tech kind of generic specific. Sometimes what happens is that tech founders and engineers can become really excited about some type of solution that they've built, some type of design technology they've built. And then they want to go and find the problem that aligns with that solution. That kind of backwards, kind of going back and checking and coming back is not what's going to understand the problem at hand. Instead of doing the solution first method, we should be problem driven. So really going into kind of as I did in the Dominican Republic, understanding the problem, hearing from the user's voice themselves, what they're struggling with, what challenges they have, and then designing for that problem. Or if you've designed a solution, still go back and see if there's any blind spots. What am I missing? Kind of concept test before getting married to a product solution and moving forward with that. And finally, consider the ethical implications of any technology, especially when it's AI specific. Meaning just because we can design the solution, should we? There have been a couple of times when there's been technology that can take some of the SPII data or some type of user privacy information, and engineers can get excited about, wow, we can do this, we can pull all this data from this general database. But the question becomes, just because we can, should we? Because what if users find out about that? Then we go right back to number one with user trust. They might feel invaded, they might feel like they don't trust us. It could also be a really bad PR risk for business, because if word gets out, then it could be harmful for the business as well, for the brand. So these are all things to think about, kind of building for user trust, having some type of training mechanism, think about the problem first before the solution, and also consider the ethical implications of whatever you're building, because ultimately the technology you build will have an impact on society. So as I mentioned before, and as Shirley mentioned too, my mission is to amplify unheard voices in product design. And so everything that I shared was kind of how I'm making sure that's orchestrated within my 9-to-5 and within the product itself. But what I also do is I want to make sure that it's not just in the product design, but it's also in the product teams as well. So what I did, well, also what's kind of the issue, as I mentioned before, is that there's a representation challenge in the UX field. As I mentioned, I'm the only person of color in the UX field in my company right now for research. And at Google, I was one of maybe 2, but the other person was a designer. So unfortunately, we cannot expect to create inclusive products if we don't have an inclusive team. So what I did is that I founded Ramsey Research Consulting, which helps people who are interested in this field of UX research have resume prep, interview prep, do what is called a UX research portfolio review, and really make sure that they're set up for success for some of these interviews going into the Googles of the world, the Facebook, the Amazon, all that it might be. We're specifically targeting early stage professionals, so anybody who's already working and career changers. But my co-lead and I are also considering opening up positions for college juniors and seniors, and really starting to work with college students and seniors and understanding what can you do now to get into UX research, and more on that later. But since I know we're about almost at time, what has always been rang true to me, regardless of my job, regardless of the company, is to stay true to your mission. You stay true to your vision, your mission, what you have for yourself, the legacy you want to bring. For me, it's amplifying unheard voices and making sure that we're building inclusive design for everyone. And I will leave you all with that to kind of sit and think about your mission and the legacy you want to leave in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan, for that excellent presentation. Now I will open it up to questions from the audience. So attendee members, hopefully you can see under session and the chat place, you can put in your questions as well as thumbs up other people's questions that you may see. So first we have a question from Rishika saying, how do you identify the problem area and streamlining it into a particular problem which can be solved?
So I hear the first question. Is there a way I can look at the question too to make sure I'm answering the right question?
Hopefully on the right side of your screen, you can see a chat and go to the session tab.
Okay, I see it now. Okay, here are the Q&A, and
I can also, I'll put it.
Okay, well, I see Rishika's answer. How do you identify the problem area and streamlining it into a particular problem which can be solved? Great question. So in terms of how to identify a problem area, this is really where it speaks to research. What you do is you want to make sure that the questions you're asking are really going to be general in a sense. So I guess there are a couple ways you can do it. The research topic that identifies a problem area is called foundational research. So really you're just going in to understand within this population, within this demographic, what are their challenges? And that when you start asking about the challenges, you start creating what is called a research script or a guide. You go through a list of questions to really ask users, obviously, like, what is your experience using this? What are we missing? What are the challenges? And when you have that type of standardized questioning with different users, what you'll start to see is patterns come up. Like if somebody is saying, oh, we can't find the button on the right, and then you're doing user 2 and user 3 and user 4, and everybody's saying it's the button on the right, you can make a kind of a safe bet that maybe the button on the right is a problem space that we should look into. Maybe that's something that we should explore a little bit more. So really the way you identify problem areas is having those conversations one-on-one or having interviews, focus groups, whatever it might be, to identify the patterns in the data. And that's how you really identify the problems that exist. To your second question of streamlining it into a particular problem which can be solved, that really speaks to, in tech, what we call prioritization of different projects. So what you have to think about too is now that we have a problem, great, but every problem can't be solved. We can't boil the ocean all at one time. So what you'll have to do is you'll work with a product manager, a designer, an engineer, a lead, meaning your director, and start to assess the needs of the business, saying, what are our OKRs, meaning our objective key results, or what metrics or what dollar amount do we want to reach this quarter? If we want to reach that, and then you start trickling down, what are the projects that speak to that and which projects don't? Then it just becomes a course of conversation trying to, with the whole team, the whole design team, trying to prioritize certain projects over others. And then the engineering team coming in and being like, yeah, we can build that. We have the technology for that, or we're not prepared for that yet. So in terms of how to streamline it into a particular problem which can be solved, it's really just a long conversation that happens with the entire team to see what is solvable at that point and what we might have to put in the parking lot for later quarters.
Okay. Hopefully we'll get some more questions in from the audience. But in the meantime, for some other questions that like to hear Morgan answer. I'll ask some questions, and again, hopefully, as attendees come with questions, you can put them in the chat. Morgan, could you provide more examples of less inclusive product designs and how having greater representation in the UX field would help provide better product design?
Yeah, there are a few. I would say not necessarily that they're less inclusive, but they have a history of having teams that can be pretty homogenous. So as we all might know, that Silicon Valley is in Northern California, and technology itself hasn't always been accessible to every demographic. So the teams that you can see are usually not teams that are coming from people who are coming from underrepresented groups. There can be predominantly male. So the rooms themselves are very homogenous. So the tools or the technology that we might know that are a little bit older, not just from a race and gender perspective, but also from an accessibility perspective, those blind spots aren't really seen within those rooms because people who are building it don't really have that point of view or really have to struggle with other issues that other people might. So, for example, some things that I have seen are the Alexa or the even Google. Well, now it's the Google Pixel is a little bit better, but the OK Google, the Google Home. What I started to see is that when you're talking to the AI technology, you have to speak to it in a very specific dialect of English. Whereas if you have a slight accent, or my whole family's from the South, they have a Southern drawl, sometimes the technology won't pick up on it. So my grandmother will be kind of like screaming in her like Southern accent, and it's still not picking her up. And the reason for that is because within research, we didn't test it on a diverse group of users. We tested it for a group of users who were in the Northern California, specifically Bay Area, or even not even that large, maybe just the team itself. And so the AI data is being trained on the users that are being brought in. And if the users who are being brought in are not from representative areas, they're only going to learn that one dialect of English. So I think one that most comes to mind would be the Alexa or Google or any voice technology, because it really is trained on data that can be pretty exclusive.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense considering this technology that is incredibly useful with AI and machine learning, but it having to be relied on an existing data set, then the data that we're putting in to train those models can make a big impact.
Yes.
What would you tell students who are inspired by your mission but don't know where to start?
That's a good question. I would think so. It did take me a while to start zoning in on my mission. And I think before you do anything, I think sometimes you have to kind of just sit with yourself and think, even from your childhood, like what matters to you? What's most important to you? What values do you have? Is it to, cure cancer? Is it to amplify unheard voices? Is it just to, enjoy life? Whatever it might be, think for yourself as to what are your values and what matters to you. Once you start thinking through that, I think you can start exploring roles at different companies that speak to those missions. So the ones who are that speak to your goals, that speak to your mission, your vision. Start looking on LinkedIn to find different roles that represent you as an individual, because you'll also have better career growth that way. And then you can kind of match it to the company. Don't just go to Google because it's Google. Don't just go to a Facebook because it's a Facebook. Really make sure that the role that you're stepping into speaks to your experience so that you can grow in that way. And then finally, talk to a lot of people. I would not have realized, I think maybe I set up 2 talks a week when I was at Google almost the first year. So I don't know how many people that is, but within the math, it's a lot of people. So I sat down with a lot of people just to say, hey, what do you do? Especially when you're a college student and you're talking to people in these bigger companies. Everybody at Google, everybody at and any tech company, I could confidently say most people are happy to explain what they do. So if you reach out on LinkedIn, like, hey, I just want to learn a little bit more about what you do, what your day in the life is like, or now you have, TikTok, Instagram, you can figure that out without even talking to people, just researching the world and the space that you want to be in and finding out how other people got there. There's no one route to UX. There's no one route into text. There's no one degree or master's or undergrad that's going to streamline you into a path. everything, especially in tech, is very wiggly. So just learn about all the different paths. Make sure you're anchoring it to what speaks to you, and always go true, I think, with your values.
I think I'll remember that paths are wiggly in tech.
Very
And
wiggly.
speaking of that, and learning about what other people do in day to day, can you tell us more about your work? And you mentioned doing concept tests and design research experiments. Can you give us more examples or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the fundamentals, like the Latin or like the root of a lot of research, is that you do usability tests. And I think that is what is known for most researchers as like most researchers, early stage junior researchers start out doing these usability tests. There's a lot of fancy language for these different methodologies in research, but essentially what it is that you'll have a phone, for example, and you'll have a user go through a set of scenarios. So if you're my user, I'll be like, okay, Shirley, let's pretend that you want to call a friend. Show me how you would do that on your iPhone. And I wouldn't say anything. I would just kind of observe what you would have the answer to be. So you would say, okay, well, I would, look at my phone, I would swipe up, I would click these numbers, and I would call a friend. And then I would document that whole process of what you did and save that as like, okay, scenario one. And I was like, okay, Shirley, now tell me how, if you want to kind of hang up on somebody quickly, what would you do? And then I see if you swipe up or swipe down. And if, for example, the technology was like, we want all users to swipe up, but I'm realizing that after talking to you and talking to Madison and talking to all these people that nobody's swiping up, then we have a challenge. So what usability testing does is it helps understand what is intuitive to the user, what are they getting, what is making sense to them, and what is not. So that's like a big kind of fundamental research technique that a lot of researchers use. The other two are definitely interviews, which are kind of one-on-one, open-ended conversations, which I don't have to go too much into because I feel most people kind of understand how interviews, like right now is working. You kind of just open-ended questions, you hear how people are responding, and you find patterns in that qualitative data. But there are other tests like heuristic evaluation, which are basically just best practices for how somebody should do research or how somebody should think about a concept. Concept testing happens when you're in the interview kind of seeing like, well, what do you think about, what are your thoughts on AI and tech? And just keeping it open and seeing how somebody responds to that. But there is a science to, regardless of whatever methodology you choose, there's a science to which questions you ask and which order you ask them, because it's going to prompt certain things in a user's mind so that they can follow your train of thought and ultimately get you to the answer that you're trying to search. So I know it's kind of a thick answer, but there are a lot of different methods you can use, but it all has kind of, there's a method to the madness for sure.
That's very interesting to hear about. I think we have another question in the chat. What do you suggest to someone who wants to understand the state of the art in any field? How do they go about researching? And what are some good resources to start out?
Okay, so I'm hearing your question as to if somebody wants to understand the state of the art in any field. Is the field related to UX or kind of just understanding the technique within any profession? Where do you start with understanding the real about what happens in these fields? So I guess I would need a little bit clarification on that.
Yeah.
But I can definitely start with saying kind of researching any field. Okay, yep, yes, in any field. Okay, so what that would mean, I think, is you definitely want to start, we have Google. So I think because of Google, we can definitely research like day in the life of whatever person you're looking at. Also going onto YouTube and saying day in the life of whoever, just to get a feel of what the methods that a person is looking or uses in their kind of profession, and just seeing, does this make sense? Is this a life I could see myself doing? Is this something I could see that I want to do even when I start? Another thing to note, this is getting a little bit on the soapbox, but your next career, your first job after you graduate does not have to be the only job you do for the rest of your life. Somebody told me that when I was at Duke, and I was like, that is so real, because I feel like there's a pressure to figure out all the intricacies in the field, the state of the art, everything you want to do that speaks to who you are, and then you are that person right after you graduate. And that's not necessarily the case. I went into HR and now I'm in UX research, and it's only been 5 years since I graduated school. So regardless of the field that you go into, when you start exploring these fields, these different methods, you can ask yourself, does it resonate? But don't say for the rest of my life. Just say for the next 3 years, for the next year, is this something I'm interested in doing? And I think when you start reading books, a book I would recommend, at least for people who are interested in UX, is the 100 Universal Methods of Design. It kind of speaks to the different intricacies of what UX researchers do. But I only found that through looking on YouTube. TikTok wasn't out then, but looking on Instagram and kind of seeing people in the tech field, what they do, and seeing what resonates with me. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a pretty broad question on how to go about researching, but I would definitely say doing some good old traditional Google searches, doing YouTube videos, and also just reaching out to anybody in tech, reaching out on LinkedIn, learning more about if there's a field, researching that person, getting one-on-one time with them and hear more about their responsibilities could be really helpful with researching. Of course.
I see Natalia is asking, when to identify a problem in a system, how do you go about solving it?
Yes. So then it kicks off the entire product design system. So usually the product happens with the researcher. We got the problem. I've highlighted. Great. The next step is that it goes into what is called a design phase. So designers, researchers, or design sprint, designers, researchers, product managers, and engineers will all get together and we'll all take, I have all these sticky notes on my desk right now, because that's really all we do. We create mural boards and whole illustrations of us showing the problem and thinking collaboratively of how we can design the solution. Once we have, it's maybe a 3 or 5 day sprint or kind of like a workshop activities. Once we do that whole workshop, then the PMs will say, okay, these are the problems that we're going to be able to support because of resources, time, the business priorities, whatever it might be. And these are the ones we can't. So then you start to prioritize which ones you can solve and which ones you can't. After that process, the third phase happens where you start thinking about how we build it. So then the PM, who is kind of like the leader of the ship, the PM is kind of like the captain. So the PM will say, okay, I'm going to take everything design and research said, and I'm going to bring it to you engineers. So this is what we want to build. How do we go about building it? That's when the engineers do their engineer thing. They say, we're going to use this technology to build this. We're going to borrow here. We're going to create this algorithm, and we're going to solve it that way. Once that's created, they create what is called a prototype, which means that this is the very skinny version, kind of like the rough draft of whatever product we want to create. Now that that product is built, the product manager then goes ahead and does a beta launch or a soft launch, where they'll go ahead and go back to the researcher and be like, okay, researcher, we've done this whole process. We have the design, we have the prototype. Now go ahead and see how this works in society. Go ahead and take a small group of users and see how they respond. The researcher then takes the product, they see how society interacts with that, and brings back any changes that need to be made. And once those few things are tweaked, then they go ahead and launch it to the general database of people. So it's probably like 4 or 5 steps of like finding the problem, designing the solution with the workshop, the engineers create the technology, then you launch it as a smaller kind of testing group, and then you launch it as a bigger group.
I know you mentioned working with different people in in a team with like the product manager and software engineers. Can you talk a little bit more about how different people bring different things to the table and like what the product design mindset and your UX research brings?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So the UX, the product design world, and just kind of like product and design, everything, there are 3 heads, or like it's a triangle. So first is the product team, and the product team, anybody who's a product manager, a product lead, product director, they bring the business acumen. So they're usually like MBAs or people who understand analytics. They have a lot of data focus, and they say, by this day or by this time, the company needs to make this amount of money, or this is the company's goal. So they have that mindset coming into the conversation. Then it's the engineers. It's like the second ball of the triangle. Then the engineers come, and they're pretty set on like, these are the different things we need to build for. This is our technology. They come from a very technical perspective of what can be built and what can't. Because while we have a lot of dreams and aspirations, sometimes we can't build it. So they come with the perspective of, okay, this is all well and good, but this is how we're actually going to build it. And the designers and the researchers are the ones who come with the kind of creative solution building. What should we do? Why should we do it? Very kind of artsy perspective to product design. So I would say the product and design people are kind of like the artsy folks, the ones who are super into the why, the right brain people who are thinking, but also using analytics, but still thinking about the look and feel of the product. The engineers are the ones who are going to say, okay, this is concretely and logically how we're going to build it. And the product managers are the ones who make sure we're all on track, that we're making sure we're hitting our business mark, making sure that this is actually good for the business. So there are those three kind of points to the triangle that all work together in this design world to make sure that we're shipping and building products.
I see. And within your role and all the different projects that you've taken on and the work that you do, what would you say is your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part. So I love to talk personally. So I love to talk to users. I like to hear about their experience. I love the storytelling element. Even before I got into UX, when I was like really little, I loved to write. I love to write stories and plays. And watching movies and reading books, I just love being immersed in some type of experience and some type of journey. So for me, hearing the journeys from everybody, talking to users, hearing their journeys, and basically they're like telling me a story every time I talk to them. And then the second part of that is finding the patterns in the data. I find it extremely exciting when you're saying, okay, well, this person said this. Oh, well, this person also said this. Oh, well, this person said this. Maybe there's a theme going on there. So I like to really identify patterns. I feel like that probably comes from me being a classical pianist. I also play piano. And so if you're trying to figure out how to practice, you want to find groups of notes that also are very similar. And so I kind of do that with my work. I find groups of notes in my data. I'm like, okay, these are all the same. These are all the same. And I like to organize a lot. So between talking to people and kind of being told stories and then also analyzing and organizing all that data work, I find those to be equally exciting.
Yeah, that does sound very exciting. And within being a UX researcher and imagining that we're amplifying the voices of Unheard in product design, how do you guys determine who to test products on? And is there a way to ensure that there's like accessibility options?
Yeah.
People from different backgrounds are able to try these out. And also, I do see a question in the chat that we'll get to.
No, that's a great question. That is probably the reason, in my opinion, one of the major reasons why products aren't designed inclusively, because the users that we're pulling in for these studies are not from diverse backgrounds. Usually product wants to do things now, immediately. Let's go ahead and pick the first 5 people you see and bring them in and let's just see how it goes. But if you're bringing people that aren't from a different background, they don't have accessibility, considerations, they're not coming from different walks of life, different ages, genders, identities, whatever it might be, we're not getting the full picture of how any person could interact with this. So I think, and if I'm understanding your question correctly, making sure that there are teams that are coming from different walks of life, not just teams, but the users are coming from different walks of life. What you do is that you create a screener. So the way researchers recruit is that you go ahead and you create a screener and you want to search in, like, I want people from this area, from this age group, from this demographic, and you have very specific criteria of who you want to pull in. Once you go ahead and send that survey, you'll work with like a third party group or somebody internally will help you kind of find those people. You'll come up with a list of like, here are the 500 people that match your criteria. Hopefully it's broad enough so that it already has levels of diversity in it. Then a researcher can say, okay, based off of, at least I would say, based off of prior data that we've done, we only want to look at this specific population, like only people in Atlanta, because this is only going to be launched in Atlanta, for example. And so you start narrowing down the population based off of any specific population you're looking into exploring in a deeper level, but starting broad to make sure that you're capturing all of the people. So every diversity set, every set is diverse, no matter if it's like 5 people or 20 people or 200 people. It's not just one type of person. Not everybody has the same type of identities. So it's really up to the researcher. Long story short, it's up to the researcher to pull in those different criteria to find the diverse attributes for their user groups.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. And there's an interesting question in the chat about how does psychology play a role in UX research? How do you relate a user's experience, or sorry, behavior to their psychology?
That's huge. Psychology is so important to UX research in particular, not necessarily UX design, I guess maybe a little bit, but from my perspective for UX research, because the questions are an art form itself. So it's not enough to just say like, hey, what do you think about this? There are sometimes you can ask questions that are what we call leading questions, questions that have already bias in it. For example, if you're saying, what do you guys think about this? Even that terminology can already be exclusive. So thinking about the different intricacies and how a user might interpret your question is psychology. It's a lot of principles within psychology. Not just how the question is worded, but also the order of the questions also matters. So you want to create some type of story arc with your questioning. You want to start with the high level questions, kind of softball questions, generic overall questions in the beginning, and then slowly somehow lead your users to kind of talking more specifically until you get to the core of what you want to know. Because if you hit them with the core in the beginning, they'll be like, what are we talking about? And then you're not going to get the data that you want. So there is the questions themselves depend on not just the content of them, but the order of them depend on a lot of psychological principles for how humans think and how they associate and how they walk through their memory so that they can provide the most accurate data.
Right. Thank you so much, Morgan, for speaking to us today and for providing us information not only about your own journey and your own work, but your mission. It was very lovely hearing from you, and I hope that the attendees also enjoyed this session, and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Everybody take care and stay warm out there. And if you're interested, I'm on LinkedIn as well. So looking forward to hopefully answer your questions and being here, whether it's career coaching or whatever it might be, helping you all as you need. So thank you so much, Shirley, for this opportunity. And I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah. Would you be okay if I drop your LinkedIn in the chat?
Oh, yes. Please do. Please do.
Okay. I'll put it in there. Yeah, so other attendees, we will have other sessions coming up. Should be opening soon for the next slot. And thank you again, Morgan.
Thank you.